Twitch requires additional permission. Check guidance to grant. Oh, I can have all chats on that one. Okay. So I don't need this. Don't need it. I need you to go into that doc. Thank you. Need to go over here. Still working on some stuff here. Give me a momento. Oh my god, what was that?
This is a subscription test.
Interesting. Thanks for the test. Didn't need it. Huh? What just happened to my chat? I don't know what just happened. Oh, this is back over here again. Okay. Alright. Alrighty. Error message. Nice, nice. Successfully signed in. Yeah. Streamlabs. Am I still streaming on YouTube? If not, that's an issue. That's an ish. Streamlabs. I'm still streaming on YouTube. Okay. I'll just pop out the chat. I'll do that again. Let me see here. I just had. There we go. That's perfect right there. Perfecto. Bear with. Why is this open on two things? Alright, so I got that up there. Alright, so today is gonna be like a bit of a test stream because I'm streaming on YouTube and Twitch at the same time. So hopefully this goes well. And it doesn't like mess up completely. Which is probably the likelihood of this. Also, we're waiting for this to happen. The White House briefing. What was I going to watch as well? Oh,
Tell
this
us
one.
about like the idea for the book. When did you get the idea of going undercover in these movements? Was there a particular political event that triggered it? Was it something that you've been thinking about doing for some time?
Yeah, I was starting to experiment with undercover reporting during the COVID pandemic when it seemed like there were far-right extremists teaming up with anti-vaccine
So what did he do
campaigners.
exactly, though? Did he just, like, pretend to be a racist? Is that what he did? Like, I don't understand his, like, his thing that he did here.
In a way that would have once been considered unthinkable, you know, to use the stereotype, a kind of violent skinhead and a crystal worshipping hippie fighting for the same cause. And I noticed that if I, as a journalist, would approach these kinds of activists saying, I'd like to interview you, hang out with you a bit, join you for some campaigning, my emails would just get ignored, or they'd write back and say, we're not talking to a member of the mainstream media. And so I started experimenting with undercover reporting by saying, I'm a fellow traveler, I'm interested, I'd like to hang out, like to maybe join. And I'd noticed that I'd have much more success getting to talk to people that way.
Of course, because they don't want
I've been doing
bad
this for about a
press.
year, hanging out with anti-Semitic renegade Catholics in Southport, Satan hunters in Birmingham, anti-vaxxers in Manchester, and started to look at more traditional far-right groups, which is how I got in touch with
Dude
Hope Not
surrounded
Hate,
himself by nut
anti-extremism
jobs.
organization, one of the biggest in the country, the biggest in the country. And we started talking about a long-term infiltration project, something perhaps a bit more fruitful, interesting journalistically, also perhaps a bit more impactful from a campaigning perspective. And that is how the person of Chris was born, the person I pretended to be for a year.
Yeah, so logistically, how does it work? So you've got this alter ego, this identity of Chris. You've got to form quite long-term relationships with the people that you're engaging with. So you have to be Chris throughout all of those. How does that work? How do you get into it?
It took weeks of practicing. My colleague Patrick Hermanson, who works at Hope Not Hate, we developed Chris as and came up with a backstory. We practiced.
You gave him a really boring
Mentioning
job,
the far right.
So no one ever
Yeah.
asked any questions.
I was a consultant, a business consultant.
Let's just pause this. I just want to see this. Mentioning the far right.
From next year, 2 million immigrants could automatically claim British citizenship. 2 million people. That's nearly twice the population of Birmingham. That's massive. We've introduced a deportation bill because we're committed to bringing immigration down. Back in February, we demanded Labour triple the time for new immigrants to get a British passport. They voted it down. And now they've brought in some half-assed version that's not going to.
Well, this is not the case. With what she said here, actually, come to think about
2
it.
million people. That's
2 million people. We've already had news this morning that Stam is making it way harder. Hello, Grand. We've already had news this morning that Stam is already going to make it harder for people to apply for, like, citizenship because they have to have an A level in English. And if they can't have an A level in English, they will not be able to apply for citizenship. Want to watch more vids? Yeah, I'm just waiting on this to happen today. I probably won't be streaming long today. So I'm just like gonna go through like these. And then
2 million
see where
people.
that takes
That's
me.
nearly twice the population of Birmingham. That's massive. We've introduced a deportation bill because we're committed to bringing immigration down. Back in February, we demanded Labour triple the time for new immigrants to get a British passport. They voted it down. And now they've brought in some half-assed version that's not going to work. Here's what will work. Deport all foreign criminals.
Mandatory age checks, tougher visa rules, Supplementary Human Rights Act to immigration cases, make asylum support repayable.
Mandatory age checks. No more pretending to be kids. Tougher visa rules and salary thresholds. Disapply the Human Rights Act to immigration cases. No more abusing
Most of what they like spout out, the Conservatives, can be easily disproven.
human rights
Like
laws
I bet we can go through like
to dodge deportations.
most of these
Make
things and just
asylum
like disprove
support
them.
repayable. And no permanent right to stay in the UK if you've relied on benefits. Until that's law, we
But
won't
this is like their
fix
policies that they
this.
want to put forward.
Labour should adopt it now. It's time to get tough. That's what the Conservatives' deportation bill delivers. And we're going to go further. Our country is a home, not a hotel. And if we don't defend it, no one else will.
That's so, oh my god. You people were in Chad for over a decade and brought in more people in that decade than we're allowed in over the last 100 years. Yeah, the Conservatives are just not going to win anything, which is good. Which is good. You're just going to have a bunch of racists in those comments. I'm not going to look at that. But STEM has already set out like a thing that's
working in
Gonna
support,
probably
function
work.
optimization.
Who knows?
And I can already see your mind having vanished and gone somewhere else. It happened to everyone who I mentioned it to. We came up with some really tedious project I'd worked on, estimating the number of manhole covers in different areas of England and so on. And the aim was just to create a character that was really innocuous, just like a regular guy who could show up, sit in the background, not attract too much attention, ideally, deflect some attention, just so I could listen to people, hear what was going on, and just fit in.
And the first one of these groups that you ended up getting close to is sort of an informal group called the Basket Weavers.
That's right.
Which is something that most people, I think, won't have heard of. Can you talk a little bit about who they are, what they are, and why that was the first step on, I guess, the ladder that you had to climb to infiltrate these groups?
Yeah, so I think they've escaped, interestingly, a lot of journalistic scrutiny until now. And that's what they really intended. They are a community building organization with chapters all over the country and indeed Europe, the US,
I've never
and
heard about
Australia.
these.
By numbers, they might be one of the biggest far right groups in this country. And what they are trying to do is set up a parallel society separate to the rest
Oh
of the
my god,
country.
don't show this message
Where
again.
they can meet, live, form relationships, even marry, have kids, all and grow even an economy separate to what's going on in the mainstream. And the way that they had come to my colleague Patrick's attention initially was because they'd been promoted by a number of far-right influencers, people such as Nima Parvini. He's a former academic. He was at the universities of Surrey and Richmond. He got fired from one of his jobs for being a far-right influencer. And he had a link on his website in
Oh my
amongst...
god, that's what I can hear. This. So these are gonna speak pretty soon. This is a trade deal with China. What's going on? So we'll see where this goes. Because this is the question what's on everybody's mind right now is how they're gonna negotiate something with China. Chat box. That works. How am I gonna do this? Is that background Optifvideo? Background color. Oh my god. Copy. This is not worth watching. I'm just interested to see what's gonna happen with it. Because I am interested to see what's gonna happen with the whole thing with China and America. And also at that, ignore that for the minute. Doing it live. Hide that chat box and put this one here. So now I should have YouTube chat and Twitch chat. Alrighty. It's definitely not worth watching right now.
Recommended reading of Holocaust deniers and white supremacists. He had this link to this group called the Basket Weavers, and it suggested that if you joined and made it past the vetting, you would find a community of like-minded people who are willing to talk about ideas that you couldn't otherwise say, and providing people with a much-needed sense of belonging. So that was the first group that together Patrick and I looked at, and that was my first foray into undercover work with him.
You said people there. You said an organisation where people can find a community, but one of the things that comes out in the book is it is overwhelmingly male dominated, and one of the things you write that most members seemed more interested in companionship than political debate. Why do you think that it was so male? Why do you think there were no women? And what were their attitudes to women and sort of normal relationships?
Yeah, you're really right to point that out. I mean, for the first 6 months that I was undercover, I didn't meet any women.
Wow.
It was all blokes, particularly in the Basket Weavers. There were, I learned later, some women who didn't come to events that I happened to be at, but overwhelmingly, at least 95% male. And it's not really surprising given the kinds of attitudes towards women that were voiced at these events. Women, I think, were either seen as, by the kind of pickup artist contingent, as kind of creatures who could be hoodwinked into bed with the right chat-up lines, or kind of trad wife baby machines. And
Interesting.
So when these
Holy
kinds
shit.
of opinions came out at events, alongside why don't women come to these events a bit more, it's not really surprising that it was so male dominated, and kind of having to listen to like this really sort of stark descriptions of different people was quite unsettling.
Is there an overlap with some of the incel communities, or at least some of the attitudes that you see in incel communities?
Certainly some of the people there felt like they had been purposefully denied the relationships that they had come to expect from life, and from a kind of sinister elite who was trying to keep them separate and alone, or that kind of concepts of dating as advanced by pickup artists that women were kind of trying to ruin their lives were voiced. It wasn't, the only opinion, but it was definitely noticeable.
And obviously you're there having to keep very quiet in the background, not letting anyone know what you really do think or believe. The anxiety of doing that must have been really intense. What would have happened if you'd got caught? Did you ever feel like you were close to getting caught at any point?
One of the first times I did go undercover, I was walking into to the event, and I was texting my colleague saying I'm going in, and then I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I thought, oh my God, my phone's been in full view, like someone peering over could really clearly see what it was. And we were walking to the bar together. He had a face like thunder, and I thought, oh God, like how have I, all the weeks of preparation have led up to this moment where I've just like such an idiot made such a slip up.
These are just it's
and he turns out
interesting
he was just mad about missing his
descriptions.
train and was arriving there late. There were so many near misses like that. You're really living in that part of your brain that's catastrophizing all the time.
It makes you paranoid, right?
Completely, yeah. There were near misses where I would once a guy put his hand on my chest and kind of as like a matey kind of pat, and that was where my hidden camera was being kept. And so lots of moments like that where you think, oh my God, have I got away with it? And luckily there were no moments where I did get exposed, but it was the thing I thought about during all my waking hours. I'd have nightmares about it after a meetup. It was like my number one fear throughout this time.
Do you think it could have gone quite badly if you had been found out?
Among groups like the Basket Weavers, they're not at all a violent community. I was with a group called Britain First, a far-right political party. Their head of security at the time was a guy whose nickname is Nightmare. He is a former football hooligan called Andy Frayne. He once stabbed a police officer.
What were Georgian attitudes
He used
towards
to carve up
sex?
football rivals with a Stanley knife. And yeah, I wondered a lot about what would happen if I got exposed in front of him.
Wow. We'll come on to Britain First in a minute and some of the more organised political elements of this ecosystem, I guess. But it seems like at the Basket Weavers, lots of discussion about opinions and experiences, not necessarily organisation. I mean, how would
Was
you
that
describe
like a
it in
documentary
terms of,
about
is there leadership? Is there structure? You say that they've got chapters all over the country and all over the world. Like, how organised is this group, and how does it then compare to the political party, I guess, which is what Britain First is, that you then get involved in?
Yeah, it appears to be much less top down than a group like Britain First or some of the other organisations I spent time with. Much less hierarchical. There were obviously like more senior figures who seemed to take a leading role. I think they did try to obfuscate exactly how the leadership worked in it, but the same people would come to the same events, and people would turn to them as like, what are we going to do next, and what are our ambitions? And
Sounds a bit like a cult. Just the way you're describing
It does sound
there.
like a cult.
I mean, yeah, there was certainly like aspects of it that I think were quite cult-like, particularly
Like
in
the video,
how they
or
treated
want a more political
junior
one?
members or dissenting members.
I've got
I
it
mean,
like
while
open on
this
YouTube
group
on my
was
other
initially
monitor.
set up to provide community and belonging and a space to discuss, forbidden ideas.
But I'm just gonna like
more senior
go
members
through
would
this
really berate
stuff
ones
today.
who expressed opinions against the orthodoxy.
And then we'll go off from there.
Someone said they had gone vegan when to recover from COVID, and this guy, more senior member, turned to
Like
the,
today,
to
I
the
want
vegan
to
member
focus
and
on this
said,
type of stuff.
paraphrasing, but did you start following all kinds of other believe the science bullshit? Really like laying into him. People who say,
I think what this guy's talking about, he just basically infiltrated like an incel like 4chan group that meets up probably. Does he have do they have the book? What he was referencing? Because that's what this sounds like, what he's talking about.
were trying to express that the
Spent a
Ukraine-
year
the
with
Russian
some of
invasion
the
of
most
Ukraine might
fringe
not have
and
been
extreme
justified,
factions
or
of the
climate change
far-right
have some
politics in the
truth to
UK.
it.
He wrote a
If we
book,
get like berated and
Year of the Rat.
I think that kind of atmosphere does feel a little bit culty, and that dissent isn't so much of an option.
Okay, so in essence, what does this group believe, or what do its members
Are you
believe? What are the
putting
kind
on
of
the
the
cover
core
story,
tenets of the Basket
Jenny?
Weavers?
It's something I heard on the first occasion. I
That'll be
went,
an interesting book to see
undercover
what
met
he
them
like
in
actually went
2022.
into.
One of the members spoke about an essay written by Julius Evola. He described himself as a super fascist. He's an
Did
Italian
you lack time for
philosopher
streaming already?
writing in the mid 20th century. And he wrote this essay entitled Negrified America. And it speaks about the importance of having a pure stock, seeing society along, the ideal society on an ethno-nationalist grounds.
I mean, it's just in
and
the background. I'm just gonna
This
switch
is
to it
the-
when
the
it's
view
like
that other
actually
Basket
live.
Weavers expressed quite fondly. I think their ultimate goal is to create a whites-only society.
Yeah, these sound like some racist white incels. That's what he's like
that-
infiltrated.
and they see one way to do that is by separating themselves and creating these kind of communities that live independently of the mainstream. One thing that they really long for is to buy land, create their own community where they have a closed economy. They have payment apps that they're developing themselves.
Oh my
they,
God.
have
Off the grid kind of
yeah,
thing.
off the grid. They even have an off the grid living kind of online forum where they can discuss tips on homeschooling kids and growing your own produce and things like that, because they believe that food systems are being purposefully contaminated by
Oh my
sinister
God.
elites to weaken the white race.
Okay, so you've got the drawing together there of a number of different conspiracy theories and political strands, I guess. You then got elevated to, promoted to, moved up, down, sideways to Britain First, which is a political party, and you say it's the biggest far right party in the UK, run by a guy called Paul Golding. Tell us about him.
Okay, so he is a former BNP activist. He's been involved in far right politics since for about a quarter century now. He's been to prison a number of times. He's actually been convicted under terrorism legislation, and he is the guy who runs Britain First. I met him. I'd been invited to join on a campaigning
look
day
at this Britain
during the
First.
local elections a couple of years ago now. The first time I met him, he actually took a swing at me. He was reenacting a street fight he'd had, and I was the kind of dummy. He didn't make contact, but I kind of took that experience as slightly indicative of how our relationship was going to be. I followed him, and I came along to a lot of different campaigning sessions. We were out in the suburbs of London, in Kent and Essex, knocking on doors, trying to convince people to vote for Britain First. And while our leaflets said, we're not a racist party, we have candidates.
They look
all
like a
different
racist
backgrounds
party to
standing
me.
for us. What I learned very early on when I was campaigning was, if you knock on the door and someone who isn't white answers, say you've got the wrong house and leave.
Wow. So no attempt to sort of even try and engage. They're only interested in white people's votes and white people's support.
Absolutely. And I did take a risk and ask Paul Golding, do you not think, our leaflets, they say, we've got candidates of different racial backgrounds. Should we not just, try? We might get a supporter? And he looked at me like I don't know, farted and just said, nah.
So how does Britain First differ, I guess? We've been doing lots and lots of coverage up to the local elections on Reform and Nigel Farage and the drift right or the drift alternative of mainstream politics. What you're talking about is very different to anything like that.
I think, yes, it's a step beyond. While the party Britain First is certainly into the idea of mass deportations and euphemistically sometimes called
surprise,
remigration or repatriation, they certainly take things to a much more extreme degree. They are a party that believes in the Great Replacement conspiracy theory.
Oh my God.
Sinister elites are bringing Asians and Africans into Europe to try and subvert.
I've talked to a couple of these types of people in chat before. They're absolutely nuts. They think that they think that people are coming over here in this country to replace the native English people. It's insane.
Weaken and ultimately destroy or be able to
complete
control
nut
white
jobs.
race. And they are explicitly ethno-nationalist. They want to create a whites only, or at least an extremely white society that has been ethnically cleansed, you might say, of other demographics. They say they don't want to do this violently, but they do want to remove the vast majority of people of other backgrounds from this country.
And was there ever any discussion about other political parties or about what other political leaders may have been saying or doing in that time, or do they see themselves as very separate from anything else going on in politics?
It was interesting to hear the kind of quite a conspiratorial view of politics. I mean, at the time, under the Conservative government, there were Home Secretary Suella Braverman talking about refugees as an invasion, and whenever a Tory minister said something like that, they saw it as containment. They saw it as a strategy to try and throw a bone to the more kind of to the supporters on the further right, without actually having to do anything about it.
Right, so they weren't convinced.
They weren't convinced. And similarly, when Reform at the time putting up candidates, they were seen as a safety valve. The idea that you could have a party controlled by the establishment to try and offer people who were the more extreme politics just feeling like they were doing something, even though it would never go anywhere. So often heard expressed that Richard Tice and Nigel Farage were these kind of controlled opposition, is the phrase that got used a lot.
That's really interesting, and that sort of flies in the face of how a lot of the talk about what Reform is and where it sits. That's kind of a complete contradiction, that you can move towards this branch of politics and somehow win people over if they're so committed to being separate. Didn't Paul Golding have an idea that things have to get really, really bad as well? Like he wants things to get bad.
Yeah, and this is, I think, a really cynical idea. It was expressed by Oswald Mosley back when he was still alive and in politics. This idea that when economic conditions are so bad that people are really struggling, that then they will look for a radical alternative, and then
Yeah, like what the Nazis did. That's straight up like what the Nazis did back in like Nazi Germany. When shit was bad, the economy was like destroyed. They stepped in and said, "We're the people who can help you." And yeah,
and a party like Oswald Mosley's union movement in the post-war period, or Britain First today, will be able to sweep into power. But actually, if you're a patriotic Brit, you don't want people to suffer more. You don't want them to have less money in their wallets. You don't want their kids to be going hungry. You should be standing for the absolute opposite of that. It's choosing,
yeah, but it's creating anger and stuff. That's what the pad he was talking about wants to do. Because the more anger people get, the more angry people get, the more they'll use their vote in like a stupid way, which is what reform runs on.
power over people, and that's why I think it's like it's.
Do I want to run for parliament at some point in the future? No, if anything, I'd rather like help parties out.
One afternoon, he said, "I want."
Right now, I'm looking at the Green Party and just like stuff like that. I would love to maybe if I had the chance, if I had like free time, go out and put like leaflets out and stuff for them. Angry by default. Yeah, true.
This place to become a shithole because only
Keir
then
Starmer
will
just
become
spoke
popular.
yesterday
Oh,
when
was
he
there-
made the like with the Trump trade deal. And people were just angry at his voice.
Appetite for it when you knocked on doors? Obviously, if somebody who wasn't white opened the door, you said you got the wrong house. But if you did get into a conversation with somebody, was there sympathy? What kind of reaction did you
Hates
get?
Starmer?
It
Yeah,
was-
I
it-
don't
it
think
was
anybody
interesting
likes
when
Starmer.
We did get positive responses, but we were conditioned. Conditioned, maybe is the wrong word. We were
He's
trained
not
to
very
approach
likable.
people with a much
No matter
softer
how
message.
had he tries to be liked, Starmer is not a much liked person.
So the first thing we were told, knock on a
And it's the same with the Conservative Party leader right now. She's not very well liked either. The only person that's like really liked as a leader, because he has, you gotta give it to him, he's like very charismatic, is Nigel Farage. Like people love him on the right anyway. I don't like Nigel. But you need to have charisma and be charismatic and like be able to stand out in the crowd, and that's what Nigel does like extremely well.
knock on a door, make sure you stand.
Even though I
a few
don't
good
agree with his
paces back so
politics,
you
I'm
can
just
leg it
saying like
if
that's
they get mad.
he's good at what he
Say-
does.
The line you say is, good morning. We're from Britain First, trying to be really polite. Can I ask, what do you think about illegal immigration? Do you think it's right that that asylum seekers are given, cost the government £7 million a day, roughly at the time, on emergency accommodation? And phrase like that, there's perhaps a discussion to be had. Or
But what he just said there is wrong, because like illegal immigrants do not get emergency accommodation, and it's the asylum seekers that get put in hotels.
resources, particularly during a cost of living crisis.
So
And there were people.
maybe he was
who were
saying it to
amenable
like kind of trigger or like get into like a conversation with the party he was talking about.
to this message. But what I'm sure of, that anyone who said, yeah, okay, I'll consider voting for you on the day, would probably have changed their minds if they could hear the stuff that we were talking about behind, out of earshot on the bus where we were driving between different wards. If they could hear Andy Frain's Hitler ringtone,
Oh my
if they
god.
could hear the others trading anti-Semitic jokes, if they could hear people talking about the Great Replacement, the coming Civil War, all these conspiratorial.
Yeah,
wars.
that's another thing they believe in, the Civil War, where they believe like British people are going to like be in a fight with like Asian people, which is like the most racist, like Islamophobic like slop you would ever hear come out of someone's mouth. We may see Israel attack Iran today. Yeah, I'm expecting like Israel to like start attacking
Extreme
Iran
politics, people
soon,
shouting racial
because
slurs.
that's what America wants, and America will back it. America is trying to make moves on Iran, and Israel is like it'll be like a proxy war where America's just like constantly putting weapons and funding into Israel, like they're already doing, but
Slurs at
probably on a much larger
non-white
scale.
drivers on the road, talking about how they
And
like to
America will probably be
you know,
involved
splash
anyway.
black people in their
Come to think
cars,
of
or
it.
even drive, you know, at Muslims and so on. You know, all things that I heard expressed, you know, jokingly or otherwise. But I think that Britain First, like a lot of far-right operations, tries so hard to present a certain side of itself to the public. They know that their ideas are weird to the mainstream, and they're trying to be considered acceptable. And that's why I think undercover journalism on the far right is actually really justified, because they are putting on a mask, and it's only by putting one on ourselves that we'll be able to see what's really going on.
Well, I want to end with where you start the book, which is in Warsaw, which is probably your biggest single undercover mission, as it were. And you talk about them having views that many people might find weird, but you also talk about them being much better organized, better funded, some of these groups worldwide, than anyone might think. So you end up in Warsaw at a rally for Polish independence, which turns up into this big meetup of other European far right groups, and you meet some quite interesting people there who seem a bit more serious about the movement, perhaps, than the volunteers getting drunk on the bus.
Right. Yeah. This was an absolutely terrifying event. Just for some context, it was. It's nominally an event to celebrate Polish independence, November the 11th, but has become co-opted by far-right groups.
The problem is, right, it's with the current situation we have in the UK is like big companies taking most of the profits and stuff. And the taxpayers aren't really seeing any benefits. Like, they work for these like huge companies, and none of the funding is, or the profits is like flowing down to them, to like the poorer people in class. Because like if you walk around the UK, you'll see like horrible public transportation. The roads are like falling apart. Buildings are falling apart, schools and hospitals, like, and people are upset about it, but they don't know where to point that anger. And because like the right wing parties are more vocal, and they know how to like swell up like anger, they know where to like point people in the direction, even though it's the wrong direction. They'll point people in there, like he said earlier with like the Britain First Party. They want to cause chaos. They want chaos to happen. It's same thing what like happened in Nazi Germany. Once chaos happens, they'll be able to get the better vote. Yes, it did. It did fuel it, because they could manage immigration really, really easy, because they just need to fund the people and like get more staff who are processing the people who come into the country, and then they can like give them jobs, and then once they have jobs, they boost the economy, and like, because they become taxpayers at that point. And like England would benefit from it. It's just that the Home Office and like the immigration part of it is just they failed on it, and now people are upset. But it's not the immigrants' fault. It's the people who are like processing the immigrants coming in.
in the white Western world who come to this event to
They're not being
march,
like processed fast enough and like
to
given
meet,
like
to
the
swap
right amount of
ideas and
stuff
swap
to deal
drinks.
with it.
And I went there in 2023 as a part of a delegation of Britain First, and saw such a difference to the kind of typical hooligan far right marches that you've seen in London, maybe, where people are getting, you know, completely pissed and peeing on monuments and so on. This was a much more
It's just
disciplined
a failure
affair.
of England.
People
That's
wearing
pretty
all
much what it
black,
is.
carrying
The English
banners,
government
you know,
failing
people were drinking or even
to meet the
smoking in the
demands
crowd,
of what's happening around them.
in the march. They'd be kicked out to present a more, you know, unified, dignified front. And it crosses the city, going from the center over to the east, and culminates in this kind of big rally where people set off flares, carrying banners that say, you know, "Defend White Europa." And it's such an important date in the European far right calendar. There are even Americans that come over for this. As part of our delegation, we met a Polish MEP, Dominik Tarczynski, who's become famous in the far right for
Yeah,
giving
not
this
liberal-minded
speech,
at
you know,
all.
Not one Muslim immigrant will come to this country, and it's a sign that you know, these
Like most
far
people in England who are in private schools come out or like take a conservative education. They don't like have that liberal mindset or like a center or left mindset. They come out as like a conservative who's just like in it for themselves, get as much money as possible, and like be like sponsored by big companies. I mean, they've all got rich dads. Like most of the conservatives and people that come out of like private schools are all like from rich families. That's basically the conservatives in a nutshell. And it's the same with reform.
right
They
parties
may claim to
and
be like the
organisations really
common
benefit
or
when they
like
get
the
to,
working class person, but
make
they're the
connections
furthest
with
thing
each
from
other.
it.
And they get funding, they get help with resourcing, they get help with campaigning ideas, and it's just such like they find it really invigorating.
Not being
To
liberal
see
minded.
this up close,
Yeah, but
was such a contrast between, you know, the leaflets that I
if they're like processed correctly and integrated correctly, they like people change their minds and they what do you call it? Start working with the society around them.
once gave out for Britain First, and then seeing actually they're really happy to march shoulder to
Like
shoulder.
most of the people who support Greens are from like Muslim backgrounds, and that's a very like far left party. The Greens are. Like they've had like people who I forget the guy's name. There was one like an Asian guy elected in the local elections.
with people carrying neo-Nazi flags.
And what do you hope will be the reaction to this? What conversation should we be having? What impact do you want to have on mainstream political parties?
Yeah, that's true.
Where do we go from here?
I think that there's maybe this perception.
Well, that's like that's the same old story, isn't it? It's like in our like past, especially England, we took from those countries, but we never really like gave anything back to like help those countries develop. They just became run down. So we like took the materials, the resources from those countries, and they just like when we left them, they were just in tatters.
UK, you know, certainly before the summer riots, the British far right was this anachronistic, kind of hopeless.
So like the
either kind of
global south, as they
skinheady
call it,
or kind of
is just like
mumbling,
undeveloped in terms of like what it
oddity
could
that you
have been.
just ignore. And over the course of reporting this book and seeing how well connected some far right movements are in the UK to the wider world, the impact that their
It's like
ideas
with
are having, you know,
Syria and Afghanistan, like America and England and like most of Europe just bombed those countries to like pieces and then just left it without like trying to like deal with the problem. They just radicalized the people.
reception they're getting. I met one group that has picked up more than $1 million in funding from an American tech tycoon, interest in race science, eugenics, pronatalism. These ideas that might have once been considered really strange and easy to dismiss are actually so much more popular and pervasive than we have given credit for. So if anyone could read this book and come away with the impression that the far right is not just always, a swastika tattooed, yelling vandal, but actually a much more well-funded, well-resourced,
Yeah, they're much more funded than like left political. All right, what have he's got to say?
Want them to increase the tax rates.
The president wants tax cuts, the largest tax cuts in history. He wants to extend his historic tax cuts from 2017, and he wants to see all of the other tax priorities that I just laid out for you included in this bill as well. As for the policy proposal you're talking about, the president has said he himself personally would not mind paying a little bit more to help the poor
And migrants.
middle class,
The
and
thing
working
is,
class in this country. I think, frankly, that's a very
when it
honorable
comes to
position.
like spending on migrants, it's coming out of like taxpayers' money to educate and like bring these people like up to date with the current country that they're in. But the thing is, like, the taxpayer right now is being squeezed in England because like the economy is shit. And this is why like you see people like the Greens and like what do you call it? The guy on YouTube, Gary's Economics, even like Jimmy the Giant as well. He talks about it, just like taxing the rich and putting that, once you get the profits that the richer companies and like the billionaires and millionaires are earning, and you put it back into the economy, like this stuff could be funded to help bring like people who immigrate to this country up to speed and help them like integrate, instead of like squeezing like the working class and making them pay for this stuff. And they like, the working class doesn't have enough money to keep all this up. Meanwhile, like rich people are just getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And that's why people are mad, but they can't see it. It can be done.
The president has shown support for South African refugees that are coming to the United
Like
States next
Keir
year.
Starmer, he released I forget, it was some policy about like when migrants come into this country, they have to get an A level in English. Who's gonna pay for that? It's gonna come out of the taxpayers' pocket again, and that's the issue. It's like there's no funding towards the social systems and stuff in the UK to like help this like actually be good. Now people are gonna get upset at his new policy that he's brought out about like educating migrants in English. But the thing is, it's like people are gonna feel it.
What these refugees are fleeing and why this is a priority for the administration.
Well, the president has actually signed an executive order on that matter. My office can get it back to you, Michael. But this group in South Africa has faced racial persecution. In fact, the government there has vowed to take away their farmland that they own.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, that's not worth watching. Let's close that. I wanted to watch this as like a free pat.
Lovely. Very nice. How are you doing?
Oh, me?
Yeah, well,
yeah, no,
everyone.
I'm all right. Yeah.
Let's go around everyone individually and find out how we are. It'll take too long. That's crazy. Welcome. Really nice to see you again, George.
Neglecting locals'
lockdown.
welfare and keep so many in poverty.
Now it's post-lockdown. We are going to be talking about
Underserviced
your
group,
book,
yeah,
Invisible
because,
Tree,
like-
which you wrote with Peter Hutchinson, and it's also a film.
Like I said, it's like the poor are being squeezed, but it's having the big companies are like still like earning crazy profits. Like if you took some of the money that like the big oil companies and fuel companies are earning, and the big power companies, they're all like privatized. If you tax some of the wealth on those and put it back into like the systems in the UK and like help fund those systems, like it would be so much better. Social housing would be better. Like we could build so many more houses and like have houses for people, cheap, affordable housing, but they don't do it. They just squeeze the poor. And it's only gonna get worse.
As a book.
Because the wealth are just
The
gonna
quote
the
from
wealthy
the
are just
film,
gonna continue
I
to get
liked
richer.
From the trailer of the film, in fact, was imagine people in Russia not having heard of communism, which is sort of the basis of this book, is that we're living under a system that most of us haven't heard of. But probably the place to start with this is actually to talk about what capitalism is. I think, and that's sort of where the book starts. It's sort of more important to just define capitalism and where that began.
Yeah, no, I think it's the right place to start, because neoliberalism, which we're also going to be talking about, is really a tool used by capitalism, and the purpose of the tool is to defeat democracy. That's what it's there for. There have been two very handy tools used by neoliberalism. One is fascism, used by capitalism. One is fascism, one is neoliberalism. But to understand it and to get behind it, we really need to...
He's probably going to go into it. I imagine, like, where he's going to go with this is like what I've been talking about. Like, with the economy and stuff. About how it continues to degrade and people get angrier and angrier. And then, like, the far right take over with, like, fascism and stuff like that.
Understand, first of all, what capitalism is.
Yeah.
And you can get into endless rows with people about, I'm pro-capitalism, I'm anti-capitalism.
Different leadership and different system. Yeah, that's why I want
by this thing.
Yeah.
And
the
there's
Greens
generalized assumption
to take power.
that capitalism, well, it's buying and selling
As UK
stuff,
government.
and it's having people working for you, and it's having
Like, I definitely think the Greens can do it. Because they want to, like, tax those fossil fuel companies and actually, like, bring the wealth back into the working class. But the problem with the Greens are they're just so crap at, like, speaking their mind and, like, being in the spotlight. So they can't really get their weight across.
And stuff. But a lot of that comes under the aegis of commerce.
Yeah.
And things like that have been happening. Commerce has been happening for thousands of years. But Peter and I see capitalism as a distinct economic system.
The thing, like I said, with immigration, if it's implemented correctly, if it's done correctly, immigration only has a positive on the economy because they work for cheaper, they'll work more hours. It's like when I was in Germany and I was working in Germany, there were people who were coming from Syria, Africa. I was getting paid more than them because I was a British national, but they were working there because they wanted to be in the country. And it benefits the economy and it boosts it.
Which arose about 600.
Like, immigration is a good thing. It's just, it's been done so poorly.
Years ago. And following the work of the great geographer Jason Moore, who applies Karl Polanyi's definition.
Unhealthy principles with little room for individuals
of land,
in
labor,
power
and
to...
money. He traces back.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like, when are we gonna get an actual political leader who doesn't, what do you call it, become this power-hungry person? And it's just like, because most political leaders that we have in power today, they just want more money and more funding. You waste your hope on Greens, I gotta have hope somewhere.
Of capitalism to about 1450 on the island of Madeira.
Yeah.
It's very specific. And
like I said, I'm a leftist, and that party right now is the only party. If it wasn't the Greens, I would probably go liberal Democrats, but I'm not a fan of the Liberal Democrats.
Says this arguably is the first place where land, labor, and money were simultaneously commodified.
No one can offer
So
a reason
commodification
to
means the
trust
stripping away
present
of
system.
social,
No, they can't.
cultural, and historical meaning. It means
If
instrumentalizing.
you want to understand where we're going in today's political system, because history repeats itself, just go back and look how the Nazis came into power, and you'll see it.
that thing, so that it has just one purpose, and that
It's the
purpose
same
is to
thing
make
played
money
throughout
for you.
history. It's
And
just
Madeira
playing through,
was
and the
struck
only
upon
hope now
by
is to try and get a party in that will stop that.
the Portuguese in 1420. And they thought, oh God, there's an island covered in a whole load of trees. It's got lots and lots of Madeira, timber on it, wood. What are we
That
gonna
is not a
call
good
it?
attitude, sorry to tell you.
You know, it's a classic imagination of the colonist. Oh, we'll call it Madeira. So, and Portugal was very short of timber.
Well,
at the time.
in
They used it all
in
to
like,
build their-
what have you got happening in America right now? Pro-Palestinian protesters are being arrested, and probably looking to be deported as well. You've got Germany also shutting down like free speech. And you've got like other countries shutting down free speech, and you've got the UK who's like very, very close to like stopping like free speech as well.
their ships to get to places like Madeira. They'd run out, and so they were delighted to stumble across this place, which was a rare example of a genuinely uninhabited land. There were no people.
Like most like people on like from my sort of political view will tell you we're very, very closed, very, very close to like an authoritarian like government.
And so, to begin with, they did what they'd been doing at home. They cut down trees, they ran a few cattle.
To where
pigs
it's
on
like
the
so
land, and
far
then
right,
someone
it's just
realised this was a
horrible
great
to live in.
place for growing sugar. And sugar was like gold in those days. It was so valuable. And it had the right climate, the right soil, and above all, it had loads of Madeira. Because you need about 60 kilograms of wood to refine a kilogram of sugar in the boilers. Right. And so they thought, you know, we could just do this. There's no one stopping us. There's no lord of the manor to say, you can't use this land. There's no commoners to say, we've got rights over this land. We can just do whatever the hell we want on this land. Oh, hang on a moment. We need labor. So where do we go? Do we go to local? Oh, there aren't any local people. We can't go there. Do we go to Portugal and buy some labor, or try to force some local lord to give up some of his serfs? No, we don't need to pay anyone. We can just go and grab labor from wherever it's grabbable. So they went to the Canary Islands and they grabbed people to use as slaves. And then when they ran out, they went to West Africa and grabbed more people to use as slaves. So pure commodification of labor alongside this commoditized land. And then they said, well, we had to finance this operation, so where do we go? Again, you'd normally go to your local money lender, your lord of the manor, the rest of it to get money. They'd charge extortionate rates of interest. But hey, we're on Madeira. We can go wherever the hell we want. So they went to Genoa, or they went to Flanders. And there were no social relations tied up with that money. It was just money for the use of money. And then when they brought these three elements together, in what Jason Moore argues is a unique combination, hadn't been done before, extraordinary things happened. First of all, within about 30 years, Madeira became the world's primary source of sugar. Even though it's a tiny island in the Atlantic,
Expansion
it was
of
just
Nazis
like, oof, this
and the
massive
rebels.
explosion in production. But then, almost overnight, the production collapsed. Within 10, 20 years, it lost 80% of productivity. And the reason for that was that Madeira ran out of easily accessible sources of Madeira.
Because
They had to go further, slaves had to go further.
I watched a video about this recently. Like, there was they were like in a recession, they lost the war, the Germans did, like World War One. Like, their money was like pretty much worth nothing at the time, before like Hitler came to power, so they were just, their economy was just absolutely destroyed. It was just like he just like walked in at that point because like people didn't know where to turn. Yeah, it was so weird that like they never intervened like sooner, Britain and France, until it was like too late.
And further to obtain wood for the boilers because they cut down all the forests.
But then didn't he have like I think Hitler at the time when that was happening, before like Britain and France got involved, I think like Russia was actually on their side, or was that like, or did they already like break their pact before that?
And so their productivity of labor collapsed. And so
Like the Soviet Union was
boom
on their
and
side,
bust,
sorry, at that time.
which turn out to be two intrinsic elements of capitalism. But then the third one was they looked around and said, well, this place is fucked. Wonder how that happened. Let's clear off and go and find another place. Right. Quit. So they went
Yeah,
to
this is
San
exactly what I was talking about, why like things are happening.
Tomé. And they did exactly the same to San Tomé, but even quicker. And they burnt through that. They literally burnt through it. And by this time, Columbus had cleared off across the Atlantic, said, oh, this place looks nice. And so they were then able, after they buggered up San Tomé, to go over to the coast of Brazil, where they worked their way up the coast of Brazil, enslaving the indigenous people, murdering them in vast numbers, felling the forests, exhausting the soil, and then moving on to the next place. Boom, bust, quit was what this new system did. Moved into the Caribbean, by which time the English had joined them, the Spanish, the Dutch, the French, people who were cottoning on to this new way of doing business. And capitalism is a fire front.
Why do I put my why do you feel such an urge to put your weight behind political groups who are still pro-monarchy? I don't know. It's like a given with, unless you have someone like Jeremy Corbyn, who is not like pro-monarchy or like pro NATO, and he's not gonna run anymore. Like, you want nothing to do with them? Yeah, fair enough. It's like if you're displeased with them, but it's like it's the thing with today's political system in the UK is like you have to find a party that somewhat works with your ideals and your outlook on life, and like will hopefully work towards the betterment of the country. It's like in America, they have the Republicans and the Democrats. They don't have a choice to like, they have to vote for the lesser evil. And that's what they do over there. But over here, we kind of have like, we have like, what, four parties right now running? So it's like you have to choose which one like aligns with you and your beliefs and what should happen. Forget about engagement with these parties. You show time for education.
It's
well, that's what I'm doing.
Economic system founded on colonial looting, which
like this is a pretty good channel. I've seen stuff before from this channel, from what they talk about, but if you're in the country and there's a political party you don't like, you have to find a party that's going to run against them and like not let them in power. Well, from the looks of things, it's going to fall apart. The UK is
consumes its own frontier, and it pushes that frontier further and further into our lives, ecologically, socially, of course, economically, politically, going ever further to grab more and more resources through violence and turns common resources into private property, which can then be
I tell you what you sound like, Grant. You sound like more like a communist. Or an anarchist. You want like a revolution to happen.
So it
overthrow like the monarchy, the government.
Commerce commerce and eventually overtakes commerce.
Get the fuck out of
But
NATO.
capitalism can
That's
exist
a lot of
without
communist talk.
commerce, and commerce can exist without capitalism.
Yeah. I mean, is there not? I mean, the world, I suppose, just seems so big that it didn't feel like they needed to plant some more trees. But wouldn't it just make sense to make half of Madeira some wood again and replant it?
Well, of
But
course,
it's just the greed of moving on quickly.
well, I mean,
Why
you're
be a
just
follower
always
of
looking
the
for the low-hanging fruit,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, the
rotten and
most
dysfunctional?
accessible resources, and as you exhaust those,
It's
you have to push the
it's not like it's the thing that I choose. I'm not a communist, not neoliberal, not a conservative. The thing I like to think is, if I choose a party that like represents some of the beliefs that I have to like go into like government, that's the way I see it. There's like some of the things I disagree with, like the Green Party, but from what they like talk about and what they say, is like they have the British people in mind.
frontier ever further and further out.
Yeah.
I'm
so
good.
you have to go and drill for oil in
My
the
mind is
Arctic or
good.
in the deep ocean, or look for minerals in the deep ocean, and your fish populations ever further and further away. You're extracting less and less from more and more as you exhaust resources, and now they're looking at mining asteroids or other planets. And you know,
I can see.
Don't
where
choose
it's
that so
going.
easy.
As
But if
Elon-
you don't
Elon
choose,
Musk
then the people who do choose will put the wrong party into power, and then you're left with a government that's even worse.
head for Mars.
So you have
what
to
can
choose.
what can we take out of there? There's not many trees there, unfortunately. Elon, if
As
we're gonna try.
someone like myself who's a Romany gypsy, the last thing I want to see is a reform government.
Try and do
That would just be the worst case
so,
scenario.
Neoliberalism is relatively new compared to capitalism.
Especially for like the people I know as well,
Yeah.
because
so I
if we
mentioned
can
like I know people who are like Muslims and Asian. I wouldn't want to see them be the target of like a reform government.
before that, you know, capitalism for the past 150 years or so has had this problem, which is people voting.
Just because of the
when-
color of the skin. And like my some of my family are like darker colored skin than I am, because of like I'm a Romany gypsy. So they would be targeted as well.
People vote. They have the temerity to ask for things like more wages and shorter working hours, and not having their arms ripped off by machinery, and having houses with roofs on, and having breathable air and clean water and unadulterated food and stuff like this. And capitalism does not want to give this to people because that erodes the profit margin. And so capitalism has been trying to solve this problem of democracy ever since it reared its head. And it found a highly effective means of solving this in the form of fascism.
You got to try,
It's
man.
not
You got to have a hope.
capitalism invented fascism, but as it came along, it thought, oh, this is useful, this is great, this crushes the aspirations of the working people, and this basically sweeps away all that democracy nonsense and replaces it with a central authority which we can effectively control. You know, and behind the fascist movements in Europe were some very big bucks. And some of the richest industrialists in Europe and in Japan supported fascist movements for that reason. But in 1945, that solution ran into a certain minor difficulty. But just in the nick of time, 1944, two books had been published, one called The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek, and one called Bureaucracy by Ludwig von Mises. And they
We'll see.
opposed fascism. They weren't in any way
In like,
people who were keen on totalitarianism or even authoritarianism.
They've
They
taken advantage of
believed
that,
that
because
they'd struck upon a formula.
we live in we do live in a country where like the main governing party makes the rules, and what's happened is part of being like part of this country.
For human freedom. And they said the state is the great oppressor of freedom. You know, if you look at Stalinism, if you look at Nazism, you'll see this centralized authority is destroying freedom. They were completely right about that, of course. And so the answer is to remove the state from our lives as much as possible, release the spirit of enterprise, and in doing so, discover a kind of natural order of the worthy and the unworthy. They were quite Calvinist in their approach. You can tell who the worthy are because they've got the money. You can tell who the unworthy are because they haven't got the money. And any interference by things like taxing the rich, spending money into public services, the welfare state, heaven forbid, trade unions, protest movements, regulations, any of those things will interfere with the discovery of the natural order.
Well,
and
that's the thing. The current system as we have it is horrible, and it's not working. Like I said, that's why I think the Green Party would be better for it, because they have different policies and a different outlook on the way things should work. If we keep with Labour, the Conservatives, and God forbid Reform, then the country will get worse and people's lives will get worse. But that's just my way of thinking. I like to think critical on what will be a benefit to society and people.
Will come out on top, and the right people will be cast down, and they won't achieve their natural position of economic dominance. So and it wasn't like they were trying deliberately to serve capital. That wasn't in the first instance their intent, though it later did become Friedrich Hayek's intent in a very clear way. But capital saw this in the form of some of literally the richest people on earth. They saw this and thought, whoa, fantastic, just as the old...
Does it want to change it? Well, it's the best hope that we have in this country for actual change.
System is failing, the old solution is failing, a new one comes along.
It'll always be a capitalist system unless you get a socialist or a communist government in power. Most parties we have right now in the UK are capitalist parties. That's what they want to keep the capitalist economy going. And you have to try and find a party that best suits the interests of the people in this economy, because it's not going anywhere.
And in 1947, they set up something called the Mont Pelerin Society, which they poured money into, vast amounts of money. And out of that came what has been described as the neoliberal international, a bit like the Marxist international, but neoliberal international, this case, not
Don't mind being a
powered
tool
by
for...
the
I'm a socialist, so... I would rather have a socialist system in the UK rather than a capitalist one.
But powered by money. And they set up this international network of these so-called think tanks.
If you get see, the party that I would be voting for, the Greens, are a left-wing party. They're they more align with my ideals and my beliefs and what things should be. So that's why I would vote for them. I'm not going to vote for a center-left or a center-right or just a right-wing party. I'm going to vote as far left as I possibly can.
Junk tanks, as I prefer to call them, who are basically lobby groups.
Which, if you have a leftist party in power, then the more people will rise up from the left and be able to fit into the system better.
For oligarchs and corporations. They set up new academic departments, they recruited tame journalists, government advisors, all
Present
sorts of
system doesn't
influential
care.
people around the world. And because there was so much money, they could afford
You
to
don't vote
recruit
easy.
the
Well,
cleverest people.
that's
who-
like
and their task
your way of doing
was
it, but
to
like
spin
if I have a
what was
choice,
basically an outrageous,
I'm
obnoxious
gonna
doctrine,
vote.
which most people who came across it absolutely hated, into something which seemed publicly acceptable.
It's like everybody
And you
has
have
a
to
choice
remember,
in
this was right at the beginning of what the French
the
called
freedom to
Trente
think what they
Glorieuses,
want.
the 30
And
glorious
that's
years,
the main thing.
1945 to 1975, when there was what economists call the Great Compression, a massive reduction of inequality, a massive redistribution of wealth, because the power of the ruling classes had, to a large extent, been smashed by the Second World War. They'd lost a lot of their property, stuff had been requisitioned, there was rationing systems, there are all sorts of ways in which they could no longer keep accumulating. I mean, there was a 98%
It's like I'm not
income
telling
tax
you
in the UK,
to vote. I'm
94%
saying what
in
I'm
the
going to vote
US.
for.
There are 100%
That's what
luxury
I'm
goods
doing.
tax. You know, this really
I'm not going to
destroyed the
get up
power
and like
of-
be like,
of
yeah,
the
you should
ruling
go and
economic
vote for this
class. So
party. I'm just saying that
they were in a very
this is
weak
what I
position,
think.
You know, the few remaining plutocrats. And, you know, Japan, they'd been swept away completely by MacArthur, who instituted what he later, about 5 years down the line, said, oh my God, is this socialism? You know, having completely destroyed the sort of the capitalist class and built up trade unions and done land reform and community ownership and stuff, and suddenly, oh, hang on a moment. What have we done here? Anyway, are we the good guys now? Shit. And so they're in a weak position, but because they recruited these clever people, they could be very strategic. And as one of their recruits, Milton Friedman, said, you know, we realized we had to wait a generation for this stuff to come to pass. But we could prepare ourselves. We could get ready. We could marshal the army.
Yeah, that's just people in general, though. Like you'll always have someone who thinks they're better than you. It'll never leave.
You know, there was a lot for all of us to learn in what they did, in their very strategic approach. And he later said, when the time came, and this was in the late 1970s, when Keynesian social democracy ran into trouble, when the Great Compression began to crumble, when the time came, we could step right in. They had this ready-made solution. And they could say, yeah, well, that Keynesianism nonsense, all that social democracy, well, that's gone to shit, hasn't it? And look, we've got the answer. And people, you know, they look around and say, who's got an answer to this, the trouble that we're in? You know, there was stagflation, there'd been the oil crisis, there were all sorts of massive issues. Keynesianism had partly been ripped down by capitalists destroying capital controls, foreign exchange controls, on which Keynesianism was dependent. And here's someone saying, we've got a complete story here, a complete answer. And so it was just lapped up.
Yeah.
People were ready.
Could we see it similar to Fear? Not really, no. Like, I don't fear, like, the Conservatives or Labour taking power, but if I can help, well, not help is the wrong word. If I can, like, give my vote to a party that I would rather see in power, then I'll give my vote.
Yeah, and again, it sort of resonates most of that with what's happening now with Suits as well. So it does all seem to check out.
Because
So
the thing is, I know if Reform takes power, the economy is going to go to shit. And they're not going to do well, and people are going to get upset about it. And then all the attention's going to be focused on them, like it is with Keir Starmer right now, and it was with the Conservatives.
It's essentially, you know, Thatcher and Reagan were the sort of the big proponents of this.
Yeah, so it had been road tested, I would argue, first in Suharto's Indonesia in
Right,
1966. And, you know, it was massive, his coup
Yeah,
against
it
Sukarno
is
was
nothing, but
massively supported by
I'm
the
still gonna,
US,
like,
UK,
vote.
World Bank, the rest of it. And he rolled out what I think we would now recognize as a neoliberal program, with, you know, having killed 1 million people in order to smooth the path for this transition. And then in 1973 in Chile, Salvador Allende was overthrown.
Because like, what's the alternative? Not voting? And if I don't vote, then there's one less vote. So one vote instead of one less vote is better than no vote.
Augusto
be.
Pinochet was installed instead as president, and again they could impose neoliberalism by force.
For animals in
Anyone
need,
who
yeah, like
resisted was
spending
killed,
that type of time, like
and then killed.
either
And,
helping like animals or like homeless people is pretty good time spent.
And
You're right on
Friedrich
that.
Hayek himself later went to Chile and said, yeah, this is great. I'd rather have this than your so-called liberal democracy, or your democracy without liberalism, by which he meant this economic liberalism, neoliberalism. I would rather have this than what we got at home, he basically said. And so they'd tried out these this new ideology in those places, and in both cases it had caused absolute catastrophe, as you can imagine. So they thought, yeah, we'll have some of that. And so, yeah, Thatcher was the first leader of what is now a G7 nation to impose it in 1979, and we called it Thatcherism because by then
I hated
they
Thatcher.
stopped calling themselves neoliberals. So from 1938, when the idea was first mooted at a symposium in Paris, until the mid-1950s, they would call themselves neoliberals. This is neoliberalism. This is our ideology. But then they deliberately dropped
It's like
the
you
name.
feel like you're
And the
believing your
reason they
vote.
dropped the name is that they wanted to
Really
portray this.
matters.
And again, you know, these are clever people. They thought very hard.
It's like I said earlier, it's like I wanna have a party in power in government than the one I believe in most and like what aligns with my ideals. That's pretty much it.
About what they were doing. They wanted to portray it not as an ideology at all. This is not a doctrine. This is not a human-made artifact. This is the natural order we are describing. It's as if we're talking about gravity or natural selection.
Because
This
like
is
as someone who's into politics and like listens to like political thinkers and how they think about other parties, I would much rather give my vote to the Greens than any other party because I would want them in the government.
how society is. We're not trying to change society, we're just trying to reveal society. Human beings are innately selfish and greedy, and that's a good thing, and we must mobilize this selfishness and greed. So Thatcher comes along, and everyone says, oh my God, what's she talking about? Oh, let's call it Thatcherism. And Reagan comes along a year later, and they say, oh, what's he on about? Oh, let's call it Reaganism. And no one ever could come up with a name for what this thing is. Oh, maybe we should call it monetarism. Maybe we should call it supply-side economics.
Well, the only thing to do is just like wait and see. It's like if the system stays the same, then you have to like what do you call it? You have to bring pressure on the ruling party, which is why the what do you call it? The current party right now that's in power, the Labour Party, like people are pressuring them about the migrant thing, and they're just like they focus on immigration. Even though they should be like funding better ways to process the immigration, but because of like the far right, the rise of the far right in the country, people are mad, and Labour's trying to appeal to those voters, and it's just not working for them. So like, if you pressure a government, if enough people pressure a government, they will do what the people want.
Oh, maybe we should call it laissez-faire. You know, no, they already had a name for it. Neoliberalism.
Yeah.
But the thing is, with Labour and the other parties, they won't. What do you call it? They won't pressure the big billionaire companies, because the big companies pay for Labour and the Conservatives and Reform. That's their backers. They won't like touch those. Where with a left-leaning party, they'll like go up against the big companies.
Crap name. It's a rubbish name. It doesn't say what it is, but at least it was a
What system would you like have in place if the capitalist system was taken down?
name, and it's the only one they ever gave it.
Yeah. But it sort of operates on people not
Like,
being able to
what type of like system would you like to see implemented? Like, which like country in like your mind has like a good system on how it works?
not knowing it's there. I mean, this is
Well, this is its great power.
Yeah.
It's invisibility, you know.
Yeah.
That's you know, they really worked this out. They got it right. They were super smart about this. You know, if you tell people you're coming, they're going to resist you. But if you seep into people's lives and you promote this idea, which incidentally is completely wrong, that we're innately selfish and greedy. We're just not. You know, we all have a bit of selfishness and greed in us, but these, in the great majority of cases, these are not our dominant values. And there's a huge body of work in anthropology, in social science, in psychology, in neuroscience, showing that our dominant
I don't think that
values
would
are
remain
things
if the Greens took
family,
power.
community, belonging, empathy, altruism. We want a better world for ourselves, but also for other people. Right? And we have this selfishness and greed, but it's not dominant. In
They already campaign against militaries, what do you call it? Selling military equipment to Israel. And they want to stop the shipment of weapons.
1% of the population. There is 1% of the population.
So
in whom
they're
selfishness
anti-war.
and greed is dominant, and we call these people psychopaths.
And they're against like far right terrorism.
Unfortunately,
we vote them in.
I mean, we're a society of altruists governed by psychopaths.
Yeah.
It's this crazy situation, and we keep doing it.
Have
to
you
ourselves.
like watched stuff on the Green Party before? Have you like studied their policies and what they believe?
We keep voting these people in, and so what they're describing is the psychopaths who their ideology then enabled to take power.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of I mean, you know, obviously it goes on from there as well, but it sort of is fascinating that they successfully do control people that much, and that, you know, if we fast forward to now and you see people, I mean, it's sort of spreading confusion as well amongst people, isn't it? And but people buy into that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't call it control.
No.
Because, you know, it's cleverer and subtler than that. It becomes a hegemonic idea.
Right.
And I think what we've got to understand in politics is that any dominant idea becomes a hegemonic idea.
Yeah, that's true. They should be doing peace negotiations with Russia and Ukraine. It shouldn't be like an ongoing war. But you have like the aggressor, who is Russia, trying to like take Ukraine. And what like the West is doing is just like the what do you call it? The words escape my head now. The defense contractors are making money. So again, big like corporations making money off sales of weapons to Ukraine. Yeah, I know, yeah. I noticed, like, I'm very, like, anti-military.
So, for instance, Richard Nixon, you know, who you would hardly associate
Like,
with...
the whole reason the Ukrainian thing has happened is just because big defense contractors can, make money. They say they're supporting Ukraine, but it's all just about money in the end.
with it in the 1960s.
That's what war is all about. It's not about like fighting for like someone's freedom or like to help a country like get out of trouble. It's just all money.
And it's true that it didn't.
We live in a
matter
capitalist
whether
world, so
it was Democrat or Republican, Labour or Conservative. Basically, they all followed Keynesian economic and to a large extent political and social.
None should die to defend Ukraine. Yeah, 100% true.
This is the only way it could be. And I think it's fair to say, or it was until fascism started coming up again, that we were all neoliberals now. this is another huge part of its power, that it operates at the psychological level, the social level, the cultural level, as all hegemonic ideas do, until you can't see anything else. This is the only option you can see. It shuts down the moral imagination. And political failure at heart is a failure of imagination. And if you're going to succeed in politics and your idea is to become hegemonic, you have to shut down that imagination. And so we had Thatcher saying, there is no alternative, which is kind of weird for a doctrine which is supposed to be all about choice. But, and she said it so often that it got reduced to an acronym, TINA.
I mean, the thing is, in the modern world, I mean, there's all these competing ideas and all these all these conspiracy theories that come up, and this sounds like a conspiracy theory as well.
It is. It is a conspiracy theory. It is a conspiracy theory. A theory is a hypothesis for which there is evidence subject to disproof.
Yeah.
A conspiracy is when people get together out of public sight to hatch a plan. It is a conspiracy theory. What it is not is a conspiracy fiction. And one of the things which Peter and I constantly try and do in this book is to challenge the language on everything. Yeah. And we lazily call crazy, unfounded ideas for which there is no evidence conspiracy theories. They're not theories, they are fictions. They're conspiracy fictions, and there's loads of them around. But we know that genuine conspiracies happen. We know about the PPE scandal. Yeah. We know about the post office scandal. We know what Thames Water's been up to. You can go on and on. There's endless conspiracies going on, and until you can absolutely, well, I mean, nothing is ever definitively proved forever, but you can say this is a theory in the same way that a scientific theory is a theory. This is a theory as to how things have been organized, and with something like the post office scandal, you can say there's a great deal of evidence supporting this theory, and there isn't any significant countervailing evidence. You can say the same about this.
Yeah.
But,
I agree with you.
Fascinating aspects of this is that because
the
it
whole
has worked
reason
its
we have
way so successfully into our
some of the terrorist
subliminal
regimes right now
consciousness,
in
our
the Middle East is because they were funded by CIA and Secret Service.
We find it so hard to see because it's too big to see, because it's all around us now. We look for other explanations, and one of the outcomes of neoliberalism has been a massive explosion of conspiracy fictions, some of which, incidentally, have been spread deliberately by neoliberal junk tanks like Americans for Prosperity, which kicked off the Tea Party movement in the UK, said Obama wasn't born in the US, all this crazy stuff. I mean, a lot of this was deliberately seeded. This was a Koch-funded, Charles and David Koch. They set up Americans for Prosperity. They then set up the Tea Party movement out of that, and that became a massive vehicle for conspiracy fictions. Now, this is one of the many reasons why we are seeing this further mutation now from neoliberalism back to fascism. One of them is that fascism thrives on conspiracy fictions. They are the fuel of fascist movements. But the other more important one is that neoliberalism very successfully shuts down political choice and political engagement. Will Davies, a professor at Goldsmiths here in London, he's got this lovely phrase. He said, the neoliberalism is the disenchantment of politics by economics. Which is the neatest definition. and that works so well because what it does is to say, we should not resolve our problems through politics. We should resolve them through buying and selling. And that determines, that sort of sifts people into the winners and the losers, which is how it should be, because everybody should be categorized as winner or loser. But what it really means, economic choice, is that those with economic power make the choices. You get a $1 one vote system, and we see where that leads right now. And so when you have disenchanted politics, and when you have said to people, there's no point in voting because A, they all subscribe to the same ideology, and B, they're not going to change anything anyway, because they've told you They're not going to change anything. They told you they want to shrink the state. They've told you they want to reduce the scope of government. They've told you they want to cut public spending. Austerity is an absolutely fundamental aim of neoliberalism. So they're not going to transform your life. They're not going to deliver the changes you want. I mean, it's profoundly ironic that the current government campaigned on a single word, which was change, and we're still looking for it. Where is this change? Sorry, what fundamentally has changed?
They've decided to change by making it more conservative than it was before.
And
Still
so,
a change.
and so then people give up. They give up on politics, right?
Yeah.
Or they give up on conventional politics. And then in come the killer clowns.
Yeah.
So, until a few years ago, Capital's favourite politicians were the technocrats. They were these dull men in suits who all looked the same and sounded the same. It didn't matter if it was Blair or Cameron or Clegg or anyone. They were all fundamentally the same. I remember Rory Bremner saying, it's just become impossible. You can't caricature these people anymore because you have to say, I am now being David Cameron.
Careful what you wish for, Rory Bremner.
Well, exactly. now you guys have got the opposite problem. You can't caricature them because they're already way beyond where you could go.
Yeah.
And so, and that was a phase when, they had reached a kind of accommodation. Capital had reached an accommodation with the state. And it was dominated by these long-established blue-chip companies which could tolerate a tiny bit of democracy as long as nothing really changed. They had 5-year plans, they wanted stability, they wanted security, they didn't want to be disrupted
I wouldn't say
by
we're there
protest or
yet
by change
on
of policy or anything like that. And so
crushing people's personal rights. We're getting there. We're 100% getting there. But it's like we're not there yet. If the other parties get in power, we will definitely be there. Like Labour's already like shutting down like pro-Palestinian what do you call it? Protests. So we're getting there. The system allows this trend to exist. Yeah, it does.
What you end up with in politics is what capital wants primarily. Very occasionally, someone goes against that grain, and you end up with Lula or someone like that. It's oh God, what happened there? This is outrageous. Oh my God, we can't give these people a sniff of power. Jeremy Corbyn, kill the beast. So you but what you get is what they want, and so they wanted these dull, besooted technocrats who all delivered basically the same agenda. But then
yeah, I know
the
you can,
opening
yeah.
came for what we call warlord capitalism, where there's a whole different bunch of capitalists who want to be lords of the desert because they can make a fortune by ripping the whole thing down and then picking the assets out of the ruins. And there was this Ian Hargreaves, who's partner in this stockbroker Hargreaves Lansdown, as a billionaire, a major funder of Brexit, and he said Brexit will be fantastic because it will make us insecure again, and insecurity is great, is what drives us. He said, hang on a moment, us? Who is this us you're talking about? Because it's not you.
Yeah.
And so you've got this sort of new strand of capitalism. What they want are the people who are going to smash the system, and those are the killer clowns. This is why suddenly you get this whole tranche of very similar politicians. Silvio Berlusconi was the first of them, but then you had people like Jair Bolsonaro, Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, of course, Donald Trump again, of course, Javier Milei.
Look, the rise of the samurai is a scary thing, all right? We can't have like samurais out here battling it out like it's ancient Japan or something. It has to be stopped.
Erdogan, Modi, Duterte, all over the world, these very similar people cropping up because that is what the new mode of capitalism wanted. Yeah. And of course, then the killer clowns can come to the people and say, look, we're not like those boring technocrats. We're not those people who have sold you down the river and shut down political choice. We stand apart from politics. We're mavericks. We're different.
He's
We're
talking
not-
about, like,
we don't succumb to that political corruption.
Nigel
that's going to
Farage
get into power.
and
Corruption is
Trump.
But people are attracted to them because they've been so disenchanted by mainstream politics. And that then opens the door to fascism, and capital says, thanks very much.
Yep.
Very much.
But is that, I mean, you know, it just feels such a risky strategy from their point of view. Like, even just the idea of creating a conspiracy theory about, you know, there being a force behind the scenes who are billionaires and who are taking all your money. If, you know, if people make that realization, or if if the same thing happens with fascism as happened last time, then, you know, then we go around in a circle with going through all these different.
Well, I think one of the sorry.
Yeah, I just want, you know, is it that? I mean, is it like Madeira? I presume the people in Madeira didn't really think about what they were doing; they just did it, and then that was the consequences. Are the people sort of who you say are behind this? Are they just doing it, and then they're thinking of the immediate rewards rather than it being a massive?
Well, some are just filling their boots. You know, the opportunity is there, and we'll just grab that opportunity with both hands. And we see this happening in America at the moment, big time. But some are much more strategic about it. And, you know, there's this recognition. It's long been realized that there's almost no relationship at all between evidence and practice in politics. You know, there's a very interesting book published by two political scientists, Christopher Atchin and Larry Bartels, quite a few years ago now, called Democracy for Realists. And it says there's this folk theory of democracy, and the folk theory goes like this, that at every election, people get together and say, how well has this candidate performed over the past 4 or 5 years? Have they delivered on their manifesto? Have they improved my life? Have things materially got better for me or not? And let's weigh them against this other candidate who says they're going to do this, and we'll read the two manifestos. And that has never happened. That's just not how politics actually works. That's how we want to believe it works. That's how the political pundits say it works. That's how the BBC says it works. It's not how politics works. People, they said the great majority of voters have no politically useful information whatsoever. None. Absolutely zero. They talked about this time when, I can't remember which US president who very nearly lost re-election because of shark attacks in Chesapeake Bay. You know, and he was blamed for the shark attacks.
Oh my God.
But, you know, and people vote on things which have absolutely nothing to do with political evidence because we are so poorly informed, and that opens the door to liars. And so you get these pathological liars like Boris Johnson, like Donald Trump, coming to power because they have discovered there's no penalties for lying, and there's everything to be gained by lying because you can tell people whatever they want to hear.
Yeah. But see, like Boris Johnson seemed very surprised and like he was being sick in his mouth the day after Brexit happened. So it wasn't. It felt like that wasn't what he intended the results to be. So like you know. And then he ran with what happened.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But it feels like they're just throwing bombs in there and seeing what happens and then picking up the pieces.
No, well, I mean, he's you know, Boris Johnson has a very clear strategy in life, which is for Boris Johnson to be in charge.
Yeah.
And he thought he could game the Brexit vote in such a way that he could end up taking over the Conservative Party. You're quite right. He didn't expect the side he chose to win, but then, you know, being the arch opportunist he's thought, oh yeah, maybe I could game this as well, and he did. And you know what the trouble is, you know, with people who have no shame is that they cannot be shamed. You know, you can appeal to all the things that you would normally appeal to in politics. You can appeal to scruples, you can appeal to tradition, you could appeal to decency. But if people have none whatsoever, that becomes a political superpower.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I'd certainly seen with Trump, with Taboo. Well, Liz, you talk in the book about. What I love about the book is that it's a very clear argument, and you can follow it if you're like me. You have no idea about economics, and the argument does seem very solid, and it's a very readable book. But Liz Truss, of course, is neoliberalism sort of put into absolute practice.
Yeah, so Liz Truss was basically a creature of the Tufton Street junk tanks.
Yeah.
She was. It wasn't just that her staff was fully populated by them; her mind was fully populated by them. She's a bit like Starmer in a way, in that she's got no convictions of her own. So she allowed these Machiavellian figures you're all aware of these so-called think tanks in and around Tufton Street in Westminster, who refuse to reveal who funds them, but when you stumble across things, you find, oh, it's the tobacco companies, it's the oil companies, it's the big banks. Who knew? Who would have guessed? Anyway, and they're the people.
Yeah, I think you'll struggle to find a party that does that.
Getting the neoliberal agenda out.
What you just wrote in chat.
The BBC and other media are only too happy to give it to them. One analysis found that the Institute of Economic Affairs alone was on the media 5,000 times the year before last. 5,000 times in the mainstream media. And they have massive media coverage. The media creates these monsters. Not just the power of the junk tanks, but it created Boris Johnson, it created Nigel Farage, it created Jacob Rees-Mogg. They are creatures of not just the billionaire media, but also those who kowtow to the billionaire media, like the BBC. There's just endless propaganda on their behalf. But Truss, in turn, was created by those junk tanks, and all her sort of immediate circle had come straight out of Tufton Street, and confidently told her, if you do these
He's spot
things,
on with what he's saying, like the way he describes this.
We'll have a marvellous, glowing future for this country, and you will be hailed as the queen of all you survey. And she was stupid enough to say, great.
Yeah, well, the book's written before Trump's second term. How do you think? There is some optimism which we must get onto at the end of the book, which I'm not sure I share with you. but how's this Trump second administration shaping up in your eyes for this?
Yeah, well, you see, it's quite interesting because Trump, like everyone on the far right, is an opportunist, and people look for ideology on the far right, but the far right always just plucks out whatever is useful to it, because it is totally unscrupulous. It doesn't care what it chooses. It doesn't have any consistent philosophy. Just whatever it can be instrumentalized, can be made use of to sustain our power. And so he himself is a curious mixture of the ultra neoliberal, rip down regulations, rip down government, destroy whole departments, especially highly inconvenient things like education. Can't be having any of that. Oh my God. People might see what's going on. So rip down all that, destroy environmental protections, destroy the tax base, stop taxing rich people, put all the economic burden onto poor people. All this is pure neoliberalism. But then he'll do something like trade tariffs. Which are very not neoliberalism. Neoliberalism and a particular form of globalization went hand in glove, and Trump runs counter to that stuff. They're still happy, the Heritage Foundation, which wrote Project 2025 and gave him his agenda in the same way that the Tufton Street mob gave Liz Truss hers. They're happy to go along with it because it's power. They don't care, after a while it's like they cease to stick to the script, and it's just like, we're in charge now, great. We'll go with the guy who's put us in charge. And so you can't say that Trump is himself a neoliberal, not entirely, but he is a product of neoliberalism. And in some respects, having become that product, he is much more neoliberal than anyone who went before him.
Mm-hmm. But let's try and see if there's any way out of it, because it sort of feels like the world is moving. I think just environmentally, which I know obviously is a big interest of yours, everything feels like it's been left too late. But everything sort of seems to be moving towards you know, unpleasantness, neoliberalism and fascism, which are the two things we wouldn't want. How can we be optimistic about this, and what can we do?
So I think there are things, some of which can be learnt from neoliberalism and how they organised. You know, it's quite instructive because they were really good at what they did, and I think it was the first fully conscious political movement where they could game the future, where they could say, right, let's look at what's happened, what has made previous political movements successful. Doesn't matter what they were, whether they were Marxist, whether they were Nazi, whether they were social democratic, what were the determinants of their success? How can we take those determinants and apply them? And whether it's the long march through the institutions or whether it's brute power from the centre, we'll just bring them all together and make those work. And they're this long-term strategic plan. But also, crucially, they realized something absolutely fundamental, that to create political or religious change, you need a story. And it has to be a very simple, very straightforward story, and it has to follow a particular narrative structure that I call the restoration story. Now, people argue about how many basic plots there are, and some people say 3, some say 5, some say 7. It's always an odd number for some reason. But I think everyone agrees that one of them is this thing that Peter and I call the restoration story, which basically goes like this. The land has been thrown into disorder by powerful and nefarious forces working against the interests of humanity. But the hero or heroes will fight those powerful and nefarious forces against the odds, overthrow them, and restore harmony to the land. Right? This is the New Testament story, it's the Harry Potter story, it's the Lord of the Rings story, it's the Narnia. You've heard this story 1,000 times, right? But it's also the story which accompanies all successful political and religious transformations. Every one of them has deployed a restoration story. And the neoliberals were the first people to look at this coldly and say, we need a restoration story, how do we tell it? And they told it very simply. They said the land has been thrown into disorder by the powerful and nefarious forces of the overweening state, which by crushing individual liberty and collectivizing decision-making stifles the spirit of liberty and the spirit of enterprise. But the hero, the freedom-seeking entrepreneur, will fight this overweening state against the odds, overthrow it, and restore harmony to the land. And they told this story again and again and again. They
and then
had
Brexit
years
happened.
in which to refine it. Now, a huge part of our mistake is that we didn't recognize the need for that, to create a new story of our own. And we hadn't done that research which they did. We hadn't done that sort of almost scientific exercise that they conducted to say what makes a political revolution work. And so, you know, apart from all the other things we were missing, and there are quite a few, the fundamental, the crux of it that we were missing was this new narrative. And so when neoliberalism collapsed in 2008, we had our opportunity. You know, this was when you strike the death blow, just like neoliberalism did in 1979. It struck the death blow for Keynesian social democracy. It came forward with this fully formulated philosophy, with a very clear narrative at the center of it, with answers to all the questions. And we got to 2008, the whole thing had fallen apart. Neoliberalism caused the collapse because of the deregulation of the banks, which was exactly what it had been demanding. And we said, maybe we could have a little bit less neoliberalism, or how about Keynesianism? That was a good idea. Yeah, we like that. But you can't go back. You know, the capital had already found out how to destroy Keynesianism, you know. And so one of the things that Peter and I have done is to say, right, what is our story? And we've refined it down, looking, you know, drawing on what science tells us about what human beings are, you know, which is a much better thing than neoliberalism has told us we are. You know, we're actually much nicer, much better creatures than we've been persuaded we are. Drawing on also this really fundamental thing. So a few years ago, I did this exercise for myself. Because I thought, hang on a moment, you know, why have I never asked myself this question? What are my values? What are the fundamental, irreducible values of this person here? And it's actually a really useful exercise to do. You know, what are the things I put above everything else, I really value? And I went through them, you know, and there were things like, you know, yeah, community, family, friendship. They're generally a single abstract noun is how you describe a value. Honesty, altruism, empathy, things like this. Yeah, these are values I hold in high esteem. I don't always live by them because we're all hypocrites, right? But, you know, I hold them in high esteem. Now, which of these values is universally shared? Which will you find all the way from the far left to the far right across the political spectrum? And, you know, there's frankly absolutely no point in going to the far right and say, how about empathy? Shall we all do some empathy?
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Well, we heard what Elon Musk has said about empathy, haven't we? You know, you're just not going to win it that way. But the one value which everyone seems to have in common is belonging. Everyone has a powerful need for belonging, a powerful urge for belonging. Even psychopaths want to belong. They want to form a group of psychopaths that they can join. And one of the reasons why fascism is now so attractive, particularly to the young men, is that many young men have lost a sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. They feel alienated, they feel isolated, they feel that no one cares, they're not part of anything. And fascism comes along and says, hey, you could be just like us. You could wear the same uniform and chant the same slogans and march to the same
so accurate on this, it's insane. Like, actually crazy.
And beat the same people up, and they say, whoa, fantastic, I've got a community. The only way we're going to draw people away from that form of belonging is to create a much better, inclusive form of belonging based on our own neighborhoods, but also based on what we know about our psychology. And so the story which Peter and I tell goes like this. The world has been thrown into disorder by the powerful and nefarious forces of neoliberalism, telling us that our highest purpose in life is to fight like stray dogs over a dustbin. But the heroes of this story, the working and the middle classes, will come together and rediscover our own good nature, that actually we are the uber-social mammals. We are the most community-oriented of all mammals, with the possible exception of the naked mole rat. But we are, we stand together or we fall apart. And building on this, we will create a politics of belonging, where our neighbors become part of our community. We build genuine communities where we start to control local resources and, through participatory, deliberative democracy, local decision-making as well. We create vibrant, meaningful communities where everyone can belong. And in doing so, we roll back the forces of neoliberalism and fascism. Against the odds, we overthrow them and we restore harmony to the land.
That's pretty much history. The restoration story makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Like, the way he explained that and actually put it forward was very well done. Very well done. The history of neoliberalism. Damn. I think that's all I wanted to watch today, because I'm pretty tired. I was up at like 5 o'clock this morning. So what I'm gonna do is end my stream here and ban that person off into cell shatters. We ain't buying your bots. Alright. I'm gonna end my stream here. And I may be live tomorrow because I'm on the same, like, sort of time tomorrow. And hopefully we can watch some more cool stuff like that. That was pretty good. All right. I'm outies. Goodbye.